Welcome to Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss. 60 minutes upcoming of real deliciousness. I am joined by Ryan Mitchell. He and his father, Ed, are pit masters, and we're going to learn more about that term. And they are in North Carolina. They are the custodians of a really many hundreds of years old tradition of whole hog barbecuing. And I have to say, Ryan, I was gonna say this right off, that I feel a little bit intimidated talking to you because of how extraordinary not only your skills are, but also the story that, along with Zella Palmer, that was woven. It's just an overarching story that on the surface is about barbecue, but actually it's multi-layered and complex, just like barbecue.
Just like it.
Yeah. So if you'll just indulge me for a minute, I'd like to give our listeners and viewers a peek into how complex this story is, at least from my perspective. And I'm hoping that you'll, just jump in whenever you need to, if necessary, and put me on the right track if I'm off a little bit somewhere along the line.
Absolutely, I love that.
So many of the words that I'm going to use are going to come directly from the book, because those words are the most powerful. So I may not attribute every single word that I say that came from the book, but most of them come from the book.
Right.
There are plenty of recipes in this book, not only for barbecue, but for chicken, fish, and even tofu. There are recipes mostly from the Mitchell family for traditional dishes, traditional sides. You'll find preparations and stories about yams, slaw, mac and cheese, potato salad, and more. On a bit deeper, though, if you go a bit deeper, especially if you're aware that the term barbecue encompasses many different types of preparations and styles. We've got North Carolina, South Carolina, Kansas City, St. Louis, Memphis, Texas, and plenty more. What cuts of meat, brisket, pork, shoulder, Mitchell's case, the whole hog, sauce or no sauce. If sauce is part of the culture of your place, what kind of sauce? In the Carolinas, it can be Eastern Carolina style, strong and spicy, all about the vinegar, Carolina gold, mustardy with German roots, or Carolina red, tangy and spicy with the addition of tomatoes. And we're going to find out more about those styles in a bit. The stories, though, are layered and complex, just like great barbecue, because they're interwoven with the evolution of agriculture. For hundreds of years, indigenous people have been separated from their food and seeds and land ownership, and most professions were off limits for people of color. It's complex because Ed and Ryan's matriarchal ancestors were plantation chefs, great cooks who created the soul food that fed the American South from the mid-1600s until well after the antebellum period. But most Americans have no real understanding of this history because it isn't part of the standard curriculum as taught in many schools. When tobacco was king during Ed's childhood, celebrating the tobacco harvest was the only time he could remember blacks and whites being side by side. The only time, for a brief moment, he says we were colorblind. Complex because being a college student playing football wasn't enough to keep Ed safe from a local draft board's unlawful practices. So he ended up fighting in Vietnam for 18 months. Complex because becoming successful, growing in fame as an African-American business owner in North Carolina, and championing the use of heritage breeds of pigs meant taking on the confined animal feed industry in North Carolina. Even the sport of barbecue is complex. It has strayed far from its original purpose, which, according to the Mitchells, was to bring those from all walks of life together to commune over good barbecue food made with love and legacy. We will not have time to discuss the many complexities in this book with Ryan, but luckily you can get a copy of it. Ryan, is it true to say, though, when we dig through all those layers in this book, that family is the pivot point that all the stories revolve around, and your grandmother, a loving, spiritually fortified person, is really at the center of all this?
First of all, that was an amazing intro. You covered every angle, perfectly. And to answer your question, absolutely. My grandmother is the centerpiece of what my family understands hospitality to be. She's a centerpiece of what my family understands, nourishment to be. And, her definition of food and as a love language, is kind of how we got here. And so that's why that's why she plays such a pivotal role in the book. When my grandfather passed in 1991, I tell people all the time, we got into the business really from a place of pain. We were not commercial, barbecue chefs. We were not running a business plan. We didn't have a business plan to be these, a barbecue business. We kind of reverted back to something that was an innate skill to survive. And so we converted our family grocery store into a barbecue restaurant, really piece by piece. I mean, literally, a couple of sandwiches would sell one week and we would buy a new stove. And then a couple of sandwiches more would sell the next week. And then we would buy a new stove and eventually able to build a commercial kitchen that turned into Mitchell's Ribs Chicken and Barbecue.
Mm-hmm. I think that what set the tone for this whole book, and I'm interested if there's a story behind it, is that there's a blessing on one of the pages just before the text really begins in the book. And the page facing the blessing is a photograph of your grandmother. Mm-hmm. She's not really in the photo, but her hand is resting on your dad's shoulder.
Right.
And this was a very powerful image to me. And then accompanying that, as I said, was this prayer written by Norma Jean and Carol Darden, whose father was a famous African-American physician. Mm-hmm. The sister's cookbook is significant in the historical and cultural story of Southern food. And though the words of the prayer may have been directed to a higher force, when it talks of constant guidance and how the hands of the cook are blessed, it also sets the stage for the stories that unfold in this book and what you just told us about your mother being such the linchpin, essentially.
Absolutely. So we can't deviate, we can't get to the point of my grandmother without me going back just a little bit to give some context around the gentleman by the name of Mr. Lawyer Sanders, okay? So doing the research of this project, growing up as a kid, there was this long, mystery and hyperbole about who my great-grandfather, what kind of man my great-grandfather really was and how many kids he had and all of these things that my dad and my grandmother, would fill the house with, all of these legendary stories about this man. And lo and behold, during the research for this project, we were able to pull, sheerly accidentally, a newspaper article from the 1930s, late 1930s, that said, the name of the article read, Negro sharecropper Lawyer Sanders fathers 35 children. Okay, now this had been a childhood, phenomenon for me because I did not believe my great-grandfather had 35 children. But lo and behold, in the Wilson Daily Times, the article reads, Lawyer Sanders fathers 35 children. And I set the stage with that, that type of lineage because, from the late 1800s, through 1930s, my great-grandfather, he was married at 14 and began to, procreate and start having children, from the day that he was married. And so as the legend goes, his father was born under slavery and under servitude. And so he continued this, plantation psychology of breeding, and just having children. Now, the most amazing part about that story is that those 35 children were only between two women. His first wife had 16, 15-ish, and then the second wife had roughly 20. And so that second wife, is where my grandmother comes into light. 1932, she was born, and she is the last of, the three children from the lawyer Sanders, complex world of childbearing, sharecropping, plantation life, being born right into, even though we're post-slavery now, but the way in which you are earning your keep and making money is you go right straight into a service style of hospitality on plantation homes or some sort of sharecropping and agricultural environment. Okay, and from that environment, my grandmother, from age, she says 8 years on, from a child to to her mid-30s, was cooking and cleaning and cooking and cleaning and cooking and cleaning for, all of these homes and environments. And so her mind of hospitality and nourishment during work hours was, almost forced. So when she would get home, she would recreate that love and that hospitality inside the house, because for her, it was a form of therapy to be able to kind of just, the need to give her home the same amount of love that she gave, the homes that she was working in, was just how she dealt with having to do it, okay? And so from there, we started this legendary, path of, being known for different recipes and cooking and, insert, the church and the community and all the things that it takes to make great barbecue and to build a reputation around coming from a family, that is so indulged in hospitality and being able to cook. Her love language is feeding people, so, and that's what our home was like, and that's what our house was like. Everybody in the neighborhood knew, that they could come there for a meal. So these are just some of the founding points on how we did the research for the book and how we came to put the project together based on family, as you said earlier, based on, just a shared interest on just what was available, what was available and what was going to be pivotal for us to keep surviving, post my grandfather's death, because we were faced with, typical challenges of losing the elder, breadwinner at that time. And so he was retired from state. He's, he had, his dream and his pension plan between him and my grandmother was what got us the little supermarket. And that was their, founding, piece of real estate to really say, hey, we're going to make a run at trying to leave our family something, that we own. It may not look like much, but by God, when we go to the grave, we'll at least be able to say we left them something, And so that's how the ground breaks, so to say.
Right. And your dad regarded your grandfather as his hero.
Absolutely.
And when he passed, then your dad, who had a career, came home. And this was a pivotal moment in his life that, as you said, led to everything that's happened since then in terms of your career that wasn't really thought out ahead of time.
That's right. Absolutely. My dad, his career and our career, as we'll talk later, have a similar trajectory, but for two totally different reasons, So once my grandfather, began to kind of have his health issues, my dad, would be coming home, quite often and to the point to where he stayed. I had two uncles at the time as well who were truck drivers, and they were driving internationally all over the country. And so once my grandfather got sick, it's kind of like three brothers had to come put base and, set up camp at home now to help my grandmother kind of care for him and make sure he's at his doctor's appointments. I remember riding in the car, sitting in the back seat with my dad, taking my grandfather to his doctor's appointments and stuff like that while he was battling lung cancer. And so, those moments of watching their interaction, you know, and watching how he was just absorbing, you know, what the next phase of his life was going to, you know, try to look like was, you know, I'll never forget kind of watching that, you know.
And you said in the book, talking about barbecue, and you said barbecue was the answer to our prayers. It kept our family afloat, both financially and spiritually. I will never forget that moment when everything changed for our family. It felt like my grandfather and father were my guardian angels.
Yeah.
So will you share the story of how your dad learned to cook from Mr. James Kirby?
Yeah. So, you know, my grandfather passes away, and we cook a hog that day. And really, honestly, it was just for family meal. You know, I'll say it again. My grandmother just cooks for the family and cooks for the neighborhood just to give away. And so simultaneously, you know, it's just a regular day at the supermarket while we're trying to figure out what it's going to be. And we cook a hog, small hog, and we use that for family dinner. And so, as the story goes in the book, you know, a patron comes into the restaurant at closing time and sees the barbecue on the counter. It's not for sale. You know, we're not even arrested. We're not even legally able to sell someone, you know, cook food at that time. So my grandmother, you know, this guy shakes the door because we're closed, and it's like, oh, you know, what's going on here? So we give this guy a sandwich just because he was the last customer for the day, and he goes off into the neighborhood and tells the neighborhood that Mitchell's got barbecue. And so here comes an onslaught of people just strolling up to the restaurant, you know, and shaking the door like, hey, you guys open? You heard you had barbecue. It's like, no, we'll have some tomorrow. You know, and my dad and grandma look at each other like, you know, she looks at him rather, and she's like, I told you, you know, this pit cooked, you know, authentic, you know, love-based barbecue is going to draw some people. And so it could draw some people. So that moment, you know, what was happening around the city, what you have to understand is that all the other major players in the barbecue business had moved over to, you know, commercial styles of cooking barbecue, shoulders, gas, you know, high volume, you know, pumping out, you know, barbecue, you know, by the hundreds of pounds, feeding all the 301 highway, all the way from 95 South, from New York to Florida. You know, those guys were feeding travelers, you know, and business was booming for that corridor. And North Carolina, Wilson was kind of like the centerpiece. If you stop there, you get good barbecue and you keep it moving, you know, north or south. So in comes Mr. Kirby, because my dad, once we decided to make a go at it, you know, my dad and my uncles decided, like, listen, you know, yeah, we learned how to cook this from great granddad or whatever, but Mr. Kirby is one of those last living legends of old guys who kind of grew up with my grandfather and great grandfather, who truly know the craft, you know, like the details of the craft to kind of make it work in a restaurant, so to say. And he was an old family friend. And once we decided to commit to cooking the whole hog, my dad decided, like, all right, let's bring Mr. Kirby in here to really kind of be, you know, the elder statesman and the guiding light of all of this, what we're trying to do, and really make sure we're getting it right. You know, it added a bit of detail to the neighborhood too, because Mr. Kirby, you know, he's just one of those older gentlemen who never wanted to cook barbecue commercially, but he'll show you how to do it, you know, in his own backyard. And so, you know, we you know, basically give him a retiree job to just come in and be one of the old pit masters to help us along the way. And he kind of set the foundation on, you know, just make sure the young boys knew what they were getting into. So, you know, he was extremely instrumental in tradition.
And if I understand correctly, his methodology was vastly different than the methodology that most people were employing in terms of the fire and how it was meant to be used.
That's right. That's right. Because he introduced us to, well, you know, his technique of what we call banking the whole hog, was really at that point in time, we were trying to figure out, we can't pay someone to sit up 13 hours, and watch a hog cook, like we don't have the money for that. We don't have the payroll and the labor expense for doing that. So Mr. Kirby was very instrumental in teaching us, the art of the fire, and how you can position the hog to cook on its own. You don't have to sit there and babysit it. If you put it on right, you can turn this into a successful operation by incorporating an overnight cook, so to say, that you don't have to babysit. And that comes with a lot of strategy, and it came with one or two burnt down, smokehouses. But it came with a lot of fire department, visits at 2 a.m. because the new guy, put it on wrong. But however, it was the ingenuity that these old guys had by, positioning the hog just right on the coals so that the larger parts of the animal were cooking slowly and the grease fires were not flaming, because you didn't have, you didn't have the heavier pieces or where the grease would come from in the hog just dripping on fire all night. You had an opening, and they called it, a banking process. So you didn't burn up the sensitive parts of the middle of the hog, but you got the shoulders and the hams done, and it all came off at the same time. That saved you a lot of time, effort, and and just the ingenuity behind it was what allowed us to kind of, push forward commercially.
I think there's 2 points. One is practical. The other is just a funny remembrance from the book. And that is that I think your father said to Mr. Kirby, are we going to stay up all night and watch the hog? And Mr. Kirby said, well, I'm not. If you want to, go ahead.
That's exactly right. Man, listen, this guy had cooked, thousands or hundreds of hogs in his lifetime. And when you cook that many and you have a system, and you know what you're doing. And so when we brought him in there, he stayed looking at his watch like, it's time for me to get home and watch some Matlock or something new. I got the fire going, the hog is on, it's time for me to go. And we're looking at it, and my dad and my uncle are looking at him like, go. Man, it's a live fire right here. How are we gonna leave this? And so, and even with my dad, I mean, he knows that, like when he was growing up and watching my uncles and watching my great grandfather cook hog and picked his first hog, he knows that, but those guys were out in the woods, cooking in pits in the ground or cooking, on pits and drinking moonshine by the fire, just having a good time. And so even then, he knows that they weren't technically babysitting it, but you're watching it and you're stoking the coals and doing that process. But then, it was also about the, just the camaraderie of staying out. All those old guys used to tell those stories about having to stay out in the woods all night long because that's where they wanted to be. They didn't want to be at the house, with the ladies and the wives. And so they would be making up how much time they had to spend out there in the woods, because they wanted to be out there drinking moonshine and having a good time. So when we transferred that to the business side, it's like, dang, my dad is like, well, my childhood remembers 3, 4, 5 people out here watching this hog, like, what are we gonna do? Stay up all night? But Mr. Kirby, he had already, he's a one-man band. He knows how to get it on and build a fire and go to sleep, and it's perfect the next day. So that was just a funny transition, very, very, very much so.
So the other point was that this preparation, using the whole hog, was really born. I'm sure it's more complex than this, but it was also born out of necessity because you had to feed the whole family. In your mother's, in that family, we're talking 36 kids, for example, and who knows how many at one time, but it wasn't like you could just it wouldn't be financially even feasible to think about, oh, we'll fix a few thighs or we'll fix a few shoulders or we'll do this. You have to make do. They had to make do and use everything. Nothing could be wasted.
Nothing could be wasted. Like, so, you know, in a real farm to table atmosphere, particularly, you know, from you have to understand from, you know, from a lifestyle of a plantation and post-plantation lifestyle, when you kill an animal, you know, there's you have to have, you know, very specific intentions for, you know, very quickly, you know. So a hog meant, killing a hog meant you were getting ready to feed, and you get ready to process the animal and feed large groups of people, or you were going to cook up, you know, an abundance of meat and figure out how to preserve it and save it so that you had meat for the next couple of weeks, you know, and days and months, which is where, you know, the vinegar use of apple cider vinegar comes into play too. So, you know, even in those moments, you know, cooking a hog, the origins of it is you're cooking a hog and you're feeding, you know, most of the plantation. Where when you do that, though, you know, all the good parts or all of the parts that were, you know, most sought after from really good barbecue were going up to, you know, the main house, and then the leftovers and or the entrails, i.e. pig feet, chitlins, hog head, you know, all of those things, and maybe a decent cut or two then was going to feed, you know, the quote unquote workers of the plantation. So, you know, the animal itself was feeding multiple families, you know, at the same time, and multiple, you know, workers at the same time. So that's kind of how, you know, the pig plays such a pivotal role in just like providing protein, you know, because one chicken doesn't feed, you know, 50 people, you know what I mean? So when you're trying to feed a group and keep a group fed, you know, for more than 2 days or, you know, 3 days, and you cook a hog up, and that kind of takes care of, you know, the protein need for a couple of days or weeks.
Right. So in the book, your story and your dad's story are in a sense very similar in terms of the we'll say the paradigm shift that took place for him when his father passed away. And then for you, who had gone to college and was working in the financial industry, and then you were working for a big company and they decided to downsize. And so you had some very difficult decisions to make. And that decision was to come back home.
That's right. That's right. You know, I had, again, from, you know, I put my first hog on with my uncles in the smokehouse at 12 years old. So, you know, that was my summer of my 6th grade year going into 7th grade. And so from that 7th grade year summer through high school, man, I was the restaurant, the commercial piece of the business, you know, the restaurant business was my life. It was my, you know, childhood job for all those years. Summertime, you know, I'm working in the restaurant, you know, after Saturday mornings, you know, it doesn't matter how many touchdowns I score Friday night, my dad's gonna have me, you know, working a catering or in the smokehouse on Saturday morning. You know, it didn't matter what was going on, you know, every other day, you know, I was, you know, at the restaurant. That was the family business, and that's how we made our bones. And so I understood that, and that's how my family kept me, you know, productive and earning money, earning my own money to do things that I wanted to do. So when I graduated high school, man, I was like, you know, I'm gonna go get this. I'm gonna try to play football, and I'm gonna make it up out of here, you know, and I'm gonna get this degree or make it to the NFL, one or two. And I'm never looking back at cooking anything ever. I'm gonna have chefs. I'm gonna have some cooks. I'm not gonna do any of this crap anymore. I've dropped my last hush puppy, man. Fried my last piece of chicken over it. Okay, so I get to college, play sports, and fortunate enough to get my degree and come out. And the first couple of months, upon me graduating college, I did come home just for a little bit to kind of help make that transition from into the 21st century. I say, my dad and everybody's still writing stuff down on index cards, and I was like, no, we gotta move to there's a thing called a spreadsheet, a micro Excel we can use. Establish our very first email address. I think it was like earthlink.com or something like that, Mitchell's Barbecue. So, and then, I got my first call to interview at one of the banks I had been applying for. And so, off to the races. I'm like, I'm going, I'm going to try to push forward with my need to get to see some things and see the world and get up out of here, so to say. And so, I spent about 10 years in between commercial and investment banking. And then, the financial crisis of 8, 9, 10 happens. And then finally, I walked into the office on 2011 and, security and everyone is all over the trade floor, desk floor. And, lo and behold, my location is going to be a part of this 2,000 person layoff, which, we didn't see coming for the States. So now, I am, just, mostly drained because I've done everything right, to have poor performance or not be a top level employee, to get fired because you're not this or that is one thing, but to be in an environment where they say, oh, we only made $1 billion, but our goal is 1.4 billion. So we're going to have to, lay off jobs. The recklessness, that I felt I was involved in for someone to just snatch your livelihood away, and so I was offered a severance package to either go to Singapore or take a severance package, or apply to go to Singapore, which is where they were moving the office, or take a severance package. And, I really didn't have a choice but to take the latter. And so here I am, sitting, stuck, mentally because, for my, all of my educational, emotional piece of the psychological piece of chasing an education, wasn't working, was at a point of where I thought at that moment failure, So, I called my dad, and simultaneously, we are, Food Network is still floating around. Bobby Flay is calling. Newspapers are still, seeking us out, and we're still, in the spotlight. Barbecue is the only cuisine with a lifelong, we're the only cuisine with a lifelong season. Every summer, you're going to be talking about barbecue. It has a position, so every summer, all the way up through now, people are looking to have conversations about barbecue and who's involved. And so we were, I called my dad, and we're having these conversations about what the brand looks like, what the business looks like. And I'm like, it's kind of like now or never, man. We got to, try to get some control over our name, our namesake, and our destiny. And let's just try and figure out if we can make a run for it, And so I just readjusted my passion, the layoff broke me, but honestly, I was tired of sitting in the cubicle for 90 hours a week. I was emotionally just, one piece of it is, I'm away and I get to have my own emotional freedom. But then the other piece of it is that, God, I'm tired of sitting down all day. I'm over both things. You know what I mean? And so that's how I, reemerged back into the business.
And there are a lot of moving parts and I alluded to some of them in the introduction as to what happened as your dad's fame continued to rise. We're not going to have time to go into any of those details right now, because I want to focus at this moment anyway. I'd like to move on to where you've changed the game in terms of developing a whole line of condiments under the name True Made Foods.
Yes, sir.
And I want to read a couple of quotes from you from the book. You said that mine was the last generation to know the difference between farm-raised food prepared by black hands versus genetically modified commercial fast food. I was so blessed to learn from them and to hear their wisdom every day. God put me here to bless my family. I'm not interested in fame. God put me here to bless my family and North Carolina. I am focused and patient. I won't rest until it's done. I can't be influential and broke. I have to show the next generation another way. Those are very inspiring words. and they're a lot more than words, because you guys, you have taken essentially the core of your dad's fame and what he learned and what he put into everything that had to do with building Ed Mitchell's barbecue. And you've moved it to a completely different level, not only in barbecue and where you're going to be positioned in a brick and mortar aspect, but also in terms of being in every household, or not every household, but thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of households around the country. And so tell us a little bit about True Made Foods. And in the discussion, if you wouldn't mind, I would love for you to share, this goes back to complexities again, about it's not just surface level. Here are 3 sauces that are all Carolina sauces that tell another part of the story of the complexities of barbecue, because it's so varied depending upon your geography.
Very much, very much. And that's, the sauces and the products, rubs as well are my passion. Little backstory, my father, his challenge to me, throughout most of my career has always been like, hey, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do to push the brand forward? There's, we can build restaurants, we can do these things, but like, what is going to be your imprint? And so, together we've always shared the vision of trying to get our products out to the world, but, things were, a little bit difficult in the very beginning. Now, fast forward to 2017, my father is also diagnosed with diabetes. So we've been fighting this health battle for quite a few years now. And so, but like at that moment, we decided to, use our platform to, some would say change the game, but really, honestly, we're just bringing the game backwards a little bit. So the slogan for True Made Foods and our barbecue brand is bringing barbecue back to its roots. And the meaning behind that is that the recipes are really just old family recipes that my great-grandparents were using before they started, pouring processed sugar into almost every condiment that you see on the table now. So we developed a line of no added sugar barbecue sauces, ketchups, mustards, and, a partner, one of my close friends who had been following us throughout our career at the Big Apple Block Party, he reached out to me in like 2017, and, he was getting some traction with his line of ketchups. And so, he really convinced us that, hey, man, like the next level of you guys' influence is going to be, how can we recreate a healthier narrative around barbecue? And so that was something that I was always passionate about, because, I would get teased at the block parties and the festivals we would go to because I was, the lighter in weight, and it was like, hey, this guy, he don't got enough girth on him to be a pit master, you know what I mean? And so it wasn't about the body image part, but it was just about, hey, like, we love this food and we love this craft, but we have to figure out a responsible way to eat it and give it to the world too, because the recipes and the gluttony that comes along with doing this job, will take you out of here. You won't be around long enough to see, your your business flourish if you don't take care of yourself. So that's always been, one of our family mantras. Growing up, our dinner table, my grandmother tell you, like our dinner table had more veggies on it than it had meat. Meat was almost like a delicacy. The barbecue, the chicken, that was like the creme de la creme. When you're going to eat those greens, you're going to eat these carrots, and you're going to eat that other stuff before you get to that. So fast forward to, we're fortunate enough to be able to get some traction in retail, man. And we got our product in over 6,000 grocery stores around the country. Whole Foods, Sprouts, Harris Teeters, the fresh markets here locally. And what we did was we kind of made some lines of delineation here between regional styles of barbecue sauce, because for people who don't know, Eastern North Carolina is a traditionally, vinegar-based style barbecue sauce that our reputation is rooted in, so that's the claim to fame. As you move throughout the state, upwards, upwards through the Piedmont area, use of tomato-based sauces become a little bit more relevant. It becomes a little bit more sweeter, a little bit more thicker. You get down to Carolina a little bit, well, they have a heavy influence of mustard seed and benet seed, so mustard flavored barbecue sauce was relevant, up from Charleston all through the middle parts of South Carolina. And now you get out to Texas, it's a little bit bold and tangy and spicy flavors because, that particular flavor profile, the Central Texas pair better with beef. So, barbecue sauce is notoriously regional, man. And it all starts with with what type of sauce you like, and how you grew up on it, So those are, we just like to have a little fun with calling out, the region so people understand, kind of like, well, why, why was this recipe used here and more than other places? What was the influence? Apple cider vinegar played a huge role in preserving whole hog barbecue because you're cooking up so much meat. And apple cider vinegar is a preservative as well as it is a flavor profile. It also is, it's like a tenderizer too. You put that hot vinegar, you put vinegar on, hot coarse pieces of meat, and it breaks it down. It kind of, gives it a easier, it's easier on the blade, so to say. So we were able to break down and cut down, your larger chunks of meat with the vinegar and flavor and the spices of crushed red pepper and hot sauce and paprika. And so, the sweeter, thicker styles of barbecue sauce are generally associated more with the smaller cuts, like the ribs and, the pork chops and maybe the pork shoulder, because, it serves as more of a condiment style of enjoyment, if you will. So that's,
that wasn't the only use, because I remember very clearly in the book that you said that you used to take this. I don't know if you can see this. These are these are your mom's, I think, right? Your grandmother's pickles. I mean,
yes, homemade. The origin of the cucumber turns into a homemade pickle with that vinegar.
Right. And there's the tipper. And yes, so I'm gonna give this a go right now. And here we go. I'm gonna have to do it again. Oh, and that's got a kick too. Yep, it's got a little kick to it. And this is the East Carolina. This is your family recipe, right?
Yep, that's our family recipe because I call that the original vinaigrette. Vinegar has a lot of different slangs to it, but that's the southern version of being able to baptize your veggies in vinegar-based sauce too, man. It preserves it, pickles it. I always loved it because I like pickles, but I like them crunchier. And so like that gives you the in-between before they get completely saturated, and turn into the pickling stage,
Right. Right. Yeah, these are really nice and crunchy. And that Eastern, let's call it, it's the Eastern Carolina, strong and spicy.
Yes.
That gives it it just
Yes,
takes it to another level. So that recipe is wonderful. And as I said, there are many recipes in the book besides recipes for barbecue. There are many sides in the book, but our time is running short, unfortunately. And I really would like to read a few more quotes that I think are particularly I'd like to communicate and let people hear from the book. Let's talk about. Let me read some things from your dad. Today, I barbecue to show young African Americans that our history lies in those embers. I wear overalls and a baseball cap, like those worn by my grandfather, Lawyer Sanders, and other Black men from previous generations, to remind me of the sacrifices of the men who wore this uniform, who worked the land and provided for their families. North Carolina is one of the most beautiful states in the South. The red clay soil in the Piedmont region, so rich and red, it provides all the nutrients, joy, and abundance we all deserve. Black folks and the indigenous peoples of North Carolina were the guardians of this land. Maybe that's why I advocate so much for small farmers, because we have always been the ones growing the food, even through our pain. The land was our connection to each generation.
Powerful words.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah. So, and I wanted to also read something else from your mother. Actually, this is actually the story of collard greens that's in the book. Collard greens are a superfood and a survival vegetable. When I was a child, Black women in Wilson looked forward to getting up on Saturday morning to go and pick collards and wash them in preparation for Sunday dinner. This is your mother telling this story, your grandmother, I'm sorry, telling this story. Yeah. Collards were a daily green for us because we always had access to a collard patch. Growing up, Mama and my aunties would come back to the house with big trash bags of freshly picked collards from friends and relatives, gardens or farms. I learned my cooking skills from my mother. The skills she taught me propelled me to where I am today. I can cook a pot of collards that will make your tongue slap your head off. I understand now how we survived slavery and Jim Crow because of the skill set of the Black woman. They made sure we were fed and loved. And I'm sorry, this is your dad talking about
this experience.
Yes.
Part. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. And then one last thing from your mother. I want the reader to hear me. I'm sorry, from your grandmother.
That's right. That's right.
I want the reader to hear me when I say we have to come together, end the jealousy and hate with each other. When people say we ate slave food, I say, thank God, because we survived. We fished, hunted, and grew our own food, and in good times, we barbecued. We have to be honest about history. White folks learned from us too. We were all trying to figure it out. I was there. I saw it and lived it.
You know, the land is the connector. You know, I think that's the most powerful piece of that. You know, barbecue is always the star of the show, but the veggies and the collards, you know, they grew in abundance. We had to learn how to take those and turn those into meals. And with just, you know, little pieces of meat during the time, you know, during the times where you weren't cooking a whole hog, you had to figure out how to eat food too, you know. So, you know, the research in the book, you know, as we went house to house, you know, the hardest part is that almost every house has the same, their plate look just alike, you know, like if they tell stories about what their plate looked like from the 1900s on upwards, everybody has the same recipe or the same food or the same, you know, thing in the refrigerator, you know, or whatever, or in the cupboard. So, you know, just figuring out different ways to kind of, you know, survive with what it is we had, you know, from the garden, and, you know, how to be respectful to the farmer and the places and the land that we were growing up on. You know, those are all things that we hope to kind of, you know, put back and play for the next generation, you know, and make it cool, you know, in that, even in the statement earlier, it said I couldn't be influential and broke, but that's not like me trying to like be some pretentious millionaire. Like I have to, like my godkids and my nephews, the younger guys, they're not going to hear me if I'm not showing them a way to be prosperous, because for them, this work is too hard. You know what I mean? Like, working in the land, working in a garden, or working on a farm, cooking a whole hog. This is labor intense work. It's a labor of love. So you have to convince them that there's some levels of profitability in it where you can, there's a new way to win, or there's another way to win besides, trying to pour all your aspirations into, entertainment or sports or anything. Like, we have to teach them, the aspects, the finer details of agriculture, the details of hospitality, and, how they could be effective.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize, but I just gotta ask you one last thing, because it just came. Well, I know you got to run, but would you please explain the sentence, "I don't eat everybody's potato salad"?
That's one of my favorites. Zella, I had no idea my grandmother was going to say that. She was interviewing my grandmother, my grandmother's a notoriously free-handed cook. So we're trying to figure out, get this potato salad recipe right, So my grandmother's like, well, I don't eat everybody's potato salad. That's the name of the recipe, because I don't eat everybody's potato salad. And so Zella thought that was hilarious. But the origin of that is, if you're familiar with how, the Black church works in the community, after service, we feed the clergy, we feed the families, we have, first and fifth Sunday, fourth Sundays, we'll have a dinner at the church. And so my grandmother's always, in charge of either desserts or sides, something, one or two. And so she was, they have this committee, where not everybody is allowed to make certain things. And so, the elders at the church were very, specific about who they wanted to make the potato salad or the carrot cake. And, the going saying was, I don't eat everybody's potato salad. So if Mother Mitchell didn't make it, then it's just going to sit there and go bad. So you need to let her make it, because it's, it has a tendency to need a lot of love, especially when you're making it at home and you're bringing it to, to somewhere to eat. They need to know that it came from someone whose hands is clean, who is a high level hospitality person as it relates to sanitation. It had to come from a clean house with a clean sink. And so my grandmother had that reputation of, when she brought food in, people could depend on it coming from, the cleanest of an environment. So, we don't eat everybody's potato salad. You don't know where it came from.
I can tell you, Mother Mitchell and I would get along real well. I know that. So
for sure.
I want to thank you again. I want to end with a quote from Zella Palmer, who was one of the authors of this book, along with you and your dad.
Yeah.
We recognize that food is the gathering, the hands that fire the pits and pass the food around the table. This is the true root of Southern food. Each bite is sacred and is to be preserved so that we remember and honor our ancestors. The collard greens, cornbread, barbecue, and love for labor and family, not the presentation, but the ethereal feeling as we cocked our heads back and smiled at each other as we tasted generations of skill and flavor. That is the essence of Ed Mitchell's renowned barbecue.
Love that. Love that.
Thank you, Ryan, so much. Pete, please pass along my best wishes to your dad, to your mom, grandmother, sorry.
I appreciate you, Stephen. This was one of the best interviews, man. I appreciate you diving into the subtopics, man. That's so important. Anybody can Google recipes, but I appreciate you understanding some of the underlying details of the book. That means a lot.
I thank you very much for saying that, but I appreciate you and your dad and also Zella writing this book, because I think it's something that I know that it's a book that I believe everyone should read and understand, sure, for the barbecue, but for all the other things that we talked about. So thanks again, Ryan. And I Steve Boss. I'm hosting Great Taste, and you've been listening to 60 Minutes of Deliciousness.